I'm really excited. Thanks, Daryl. This is a major, majorly important conversation. It actually plays so well into what the Chen has found during as a part of the Jubility work. We have we've gathered up so many wonderful ideas over the last 10 years, I guess, or so. As I love that notion of the reformed enterprise architect, because I guess, as we learned in the, from 2000 to 2010, and then learned even more deeply from 2010 to 2020, as we've been doing Iasa, as we've been studying architecture practices, we've seen that the value is in the value is in the outcomes, and the outcomes come from change. The change is driven by the customer and possibly the stakeholder, but primarily the customer. Now, that also might mean member, citizen, mission, objective, but fundamentally, this notion that driving change is about outcomes, it has created this sense of a horizontal change activity that we are calling value streams these days, and we'll talk about what those are. But the the learning has been something that we've noticed with successful architecture teams, and that is business and solution and business and solution and business and solution and business and solution, with the different types of architects leading a solution change. So, that a senior software architect might lead a large software initiative, but there's infrastructure, information, there's cloud initiatives, things of that nature. And those technologies have become fundamental to business success. And yet we still talk about change like it's top down, and we still talk about change like it's can be planned 3 years in advance, as opposed to this world where one minor thing in our ecosystem might change everything for us. So this presentation is about the partnership between business and solution architects. And again, we're gonna define a little bit about what those terms mean. Iasa is unbelievably rigorous about the application of the term architect first, and then the application of a specialization to that. And I won't go too much into that in this presentation, but as Daryl said, I'm the founder, CEO of Iasa. I had a harebrained idea, and it's exactly as he described it. I had a harebrained idea in 2001 to start a user group. And because of the success of that user group in Austin, Texas, 2002, I started Iasa. And the goal of Iasa has been to study architects and to promote them, and to of all types. We want infrastructure, information, software solution, business, enterprise, chief, cloud, AI. Name your architect brand, and we want them to work together as a profession. So keep that in mind as we go through some of the slides, the presentation here, because the notion that the horizontal is more important than the vertical now is going to be one of the keys. That effectively the change happens at the edges, if you want to think about it, instead of vertical, horizontal. But how we organize change towards objectives is based on this sensing of our environment and our ecosystem of change, and that we need to respond to, whether that be business or technical change, and that the business to solution architects are utterly perfectly positioned, if they work well together, to make this smooth, continuous, experimental, risk-free, you name your objective type, and they're perfectly positioned to make this happen. Now, again, I want to talk just say for a second that Our definition of architecture is surprisingly simple. Notice that it doesn't say the connection of business items and organizational objectives to outcome-driven models. It doesn't say, the organization of components and how they're interrelated interfaces. But we don't have to define architecture. Architecture is what architects do. What we have to define is the value proposition of architecture, meaning it has to be so simple that I always just call it the grandma test. It has to be so simple that my grandma can understand what architects do. And this is a point of contention, especially in a business architecture conference. But keep in mind, business architecture is a fundamentally important thing in the Iasa model. We call the definition of architecture the art and science of designing and delivering valuable technology strategy. Now, notice that it doesn't say valuable business strategy, because a lot of software architects, while delivering portions of business strategy, would never be able to identify with that. Also, the art and science of designing valuable business strategy is owned by business management. We already have business consultants. They make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year doing that thing. They've done it for decades. It's already a field. And it doesn't cover the technical skill set that makes us into what we call digital transformers, or ultimately achieving what we call digital advantage, which is a very unique skill set. So the valuable and strategy part of that, though, speak directly to what you just heard from about Jability and what you've heard all along about business architecture. Again, we think of this more as a competency model and a reason why people hire any architects, not just one type. Because we are looking for value propositions for all of the architects together. Now, all this is going to make a little more sense as we go through these rules of the road for why this is important. So I effectively just made this point, right? 68% of global business leaders list digital transformation as a top priority for their business. Now that's gone up. This is actually an old statistic. The technology is business. Business is technology. When the CEO of an international bank says, we're not a bank, we're a technology company, you know the world has changed. So what we're saying is that we need to get away from the notion that, that business and technology are somehow at odds. Just like we got away from the notion that finance and business. I mean, when nobody says, it's about the business, not finance. Nobody says it's about the business, not marketing. See, it's our rhetoric that actually gets in our way in providing the kind of change advantage that we so love. Now, part of that represents this concept that I want to introduce first, and that is outcome ownership. Now, as we dig into this model of being owners of change, owners of outcomes, what we end up with is a very clear seat at the table. And there's a difficulty in current business and solution and enterprise architecture thinking, in that we tend to think either as facilitators or as documenters. And I don't know about you, but I've been at meetings where there was somebody documenting, where I had an ownership stake at the table, and it wasn't me. And I've been at meetings where we had facilitators and they were valued, but they were not a part of the ownership field, right? Marketing, finance, sales, operations, technology. What we needed in the world for a long time, and what we've heard at every conference, is that on the technology side is you got to serve the business. And what we translated that to is everybody else in the company is the business instead of us. Well, what we've discovered is that in fact architecture is an amazingly intensely cool way to own strategy to execution, which we hear all the time, through delivery of technology strategy, and that delivery gives us an ownership stake. We actually end up becoming more of the change agents than we do the established structural norm agents, which is one of the things that Daryl brought up today. And I'm going to have to get the quote exactly right, because it's going into the lexicon of the things that I talk about. But in this, I want you to think, if you were to pay a building architect some number of millions of dollars to build your dream home, you're not paying them because you want to design a kitchen. You're paying them because you want them to translate their vision into ownership of an outcome for you. And that's how our stakeholders want to see us. And when we behave that way, we begin to see real change. Now, it isn't just behavior. It's not about, I'm going to have the seat at the, I'm going to be at the head of the table. It's about having that stake in the outcome creates a mentality of value-driven decision-making. And I'll say quite simply, decision-making at velocity in complex environments is at the heart of all architectural activities. And that's where we get to this whole concept of form and what do we do, and what is all this business architecture stuff. Now, this is a museum. I visited the Walmart museum. I visited and took this picture, and it's kind of a funky looking place in a picture. You know, obviously it has kind of like you get that sense of like that looks like a bug shell or something like that. But much like when I walked into Notre Dame the first time, or you know, the Duomo in Milan, or the Sydney Opera House, it gave me that wow factor. You know, wow, this was created, and it creates value for me. And in building architecture, that's called form. Now, here's a quote: "Form in architecture starts in the eye of the beholder, or," and this is the one that I'm thinking of most, "in a deep process that transcends human existence." And that comes from a software architecture book, which I find quite interesting, because we talk about these deep changes in society and the world at large, and how that works, and how that's going, and what's going on, and how our customers are changing, and how we have to change with them, and how our objectives change quickly, and how, you know, processes are dynamic now, and many of them automated, and AI is kicking in, and metaversing, and we're doing all of these things, Web 3.0, and all of these technology things, but also people are changing, right? Moving out of the cities in some cases because of technology, in some cases changing the way our work habits and teams work, and changing the way we hire and fire, changing the way we outsource, changing the way we think about finance and investment. Like literally the whole world's changing underneath of us. And so we have to start thinking very carefully about how we deal with those changes. And that's what this form is for Iasa. For Iasa, form is what we call digital advantage. Now, at all the conferences you hear digital transformation, but I think digital transformation is a consultant's word. I think digital transformation is where you spend money with consultants and on products. And it's all nifty and good and stuff like that, and we talk about it, but it is outcomes advantage that we're spending all that money for. And this, and why, so why am I talking about this with business architecture? Well, because business architecture isn't just about the discovery of capabilities. It is actually a representation of the entire architecture team within individual business units. So while yes, you're working on capabilities, and yes, you're working on OKRs, and yes, you're working on organizational dynamics and structure, and yes, motivations, and yes to value streams, really, the rest of the architecture practice is also depending on you to represent the rest of architecture, and to have that ownership seat at the table. And it changes the nature of your relationship with your business units. I just came from a very large organization with a lot of business, about 16, I guess it's not very large, it's only 16 billion. And one of the things we were talking about is effectively that they are trapped behind the iron curtain. They're trapped behind the IT curtain. And this is where business architects are so free and potentially so valuable, is that they are actually in the day in and day out with other business units, with our business partners, our business equals. Notice, I always use quotes when I say the business, because I think that IT is just as much the business as finances. In fact, in a digitally transformed world, it could be argued that IT is more the business than any of the other business units. Oops. The notion that architecture then can drive digital advantage comes from exactly what we've seen. And this very simple ADDT model is baked into what we call the Bitterbox. And I'm going to show a few tools and a few things today that will help you understand why this is so important. It means being involved and being actively driving the innovation lifecycle, which is a whole talk in and of itself, because there's lots of kinds of innovation. Ideas come from everywhere from crowdsourcing ideas all the way to the lowest level employee. Turning those ideas into a program investment. How do we think about change, and what change do we decide to change do we decide to invest in? And that program investment thinking can is a whole series of talks that we do based on the difference between, for example, agile investment strategies, where you have small team of investors, or large corporate budgets, or government funding, or grants. There's lots of investment, or VC capital, that change the way that we create our entire socio-technical systems, the way we organize teams and the way that we organize capability transition. So you can see kind of natural. It's like, I mean, you can see that this capability transition is really what we're after. We're after changing our capabilities in ways to either automate them, or to enhance them, or even to just change them in normal people and process ways. All of that, though, needs to be driven and understood through value management. Again, doesn't matter if we change something if we don't know if we changed it well. And again, each one of these is an area of research and exploration at Iasa, and one that we hope that you'll participate in. And I'll show you how. Now, a lot of us as architects have always focused on operational excellence. Operational excellence is how you run the static structure of an organization, how you keep the lights on, whether that be people, process, or technology, doesn't really matter. It's, we got to take orders, or I got to go on 6 sales calls a day. That's operational excellence. The rest is about innovation. And all of this leads us to what we're going to talk about related to an engagement model. Now, I want to say that in the last years, we've learned that top-down doesn't work for architects. We organized ourselves originally based on scarcity. So, okay, there's not enough solution architects for every project, so let's create a domain architect that looks over lots of solutions. That we need to do We need to be involved in the consumer banking group. So let's create an enterprise architect for consumer banking. And they'll look at everything. And this top-down hierarchical structure mirrors what we've seen in traditional industrial style management, or Industry 2.0. However, for professions, it doesn't work. There is no medicining the hospital, right? No, that sounds silly to say, but we always say architecting the enterprise as if we can fix everything with a decision at the top. And yet complexity arises, change arises, and innovation arises from the edges, from the most simple one-to-one little thing. We noticed customers were drinking, were refusing to use our straws until we switched to sustainable straws. And then all of a sudden they bought more drinks because it made them feel better. Those little tiny things. Innovation, change, but also complexity, which happens in this model at the bottom. And here's what the significant failures are. Here's the reason it's an anti-pattern. The too large a coverage area, you lose skill and you become a manager. You become a top-down thinker. You start serving your boss more than you're doing architecture. And to think about this, if the chief of medicine hadn't seen a patient for 20 years, how would they still be a doctor? So it isn't about that we can't be at that level of scope. It's about the coverage that we are trying to think about. And this gets really tricky. Domain architects lose delivery focus, or business architects lose this whole concept of delivery. That's more, it ends up being just like it always was. Throw it over the wall to those IT architects. And we begin to break apart. We have seen this in thousands of surveys. We begin to see chasms form between these groups. And then obviously the last step of this is that solution architects become too technical and don't not know anything about business at all. So we end up with no shared language and all of these broken communication channels in what should be a practice model. What we have found is that a much more successful organizational strategy for architects, and again, I say organizational, not in the reporting structure, because we have found that reporting structure is less important, not unimportant, than the community of architects being able to work effectively together towards value creation. And so we've created what we call value stream architecture, which pairs business and solution architects at the value stream level. Now that's normally, depending on the size of the value stream, that's normally a one to many or a many to many. There are many business architects to many solution architects, but that they have a strong bond. Now, the reason that we have those other architects information software infrastructure is that solution architects is just a general term. That a solution architect may be a solution architect that has an information architecture background and is working on a huge knowledge management and knowledge creation. So that pairing we've found is important. Now notice we also didn't leave out your SI and your vendor community, because they are a fundamental aspect of the success of this method. Meaning you need them, but you also need them to be saying the same things as you. And right now, this is not the case. Every SI trains its architects differently. Every vendor talks about architecture differently. They'll roll out a new architecture method and it will be and I'm not going to name an SI or vendor because it'll seem like I'm picking on them, but we all know this, right? So some of them will send us somebody who's basically just a senior coder and they'll say, what do you mean business? And some of them will send us a business architect that's all about executive level engagement. Sometimes, we get these competing things. With this method, all architects are part of the practice. And what we've done in our program is we've given enterprise architects a promotion. So it's not that we don't feel that that architects need to work at that executive scope. And notice that the chief architect being with IT, that isn't necessarily a reporting thing. It just means over all the other architects. But by using the concept of chief of instead of enterprise architect, we end up with something very interesting. Chief of consumer banking, chief architect of security, chief architect. By having more chief of architects, you actually look a lot more like a hospital than you look like a traditional organizational management chain. And we have seen that this method actually creates a much stronger professional practice. Now, the value stream architecture works as a horizontal. It works to create integrated value outcomes. And that's what we're going to be talking about. So my number 2 rule for business architecture success is you're designing an ecosystem. You're not designing an enterprise. Excuse me. That should be you're designing into an ecosystem, not designing an enterprise. It's a bit of a hubris, a bit too much like hubris to think that we could design an ecosystem, much less an enterprise, which is itself an ecosystem. I'd like business architects and all architects to begin thinking more like we are introducing changes in a complex environment that behaves in ways that are unexpected. We've all had this perfect example. We've heard it from 1,000 talks. It happened, however it began with something small that changed the way the whole world worked. And this happens in lots of industries. Some little tiny thing changes and we all have to respond to it. I mean, we can use the Uber and Airbnb examples if you want, right? Like all of a sudden taxi companies are going out of business because there's this new app out there. An ecosystem then is important to understand because it means that business ecosystems become further involved in terms of platforms and interchangeable parts. We actually have to start thinking in terms of co-opetition becoming more important and then the improvement of our product. See, SIPOC diagrams and business models and internal capability thinking is all well and good. But when the universe is changing around you every day, and there are 25 players in every space, you actually have to start thinking about co-opetition, about how do we play in this ecosystem? How does our business model work? I always use the example here of flying, and that very few of us, except for those of us that can afford private jets and that kind of thing, actually enjoy the process of flying. We enjoy vacation, but that's about being on a beach somewhere with the little martini glass or whatever, the little, umbrella and all that. The process of going to the airport and getting on a plane, the people that like that are few and far between. Now, I happen to be one of those because I actually like travel as opposed to just getting somewhere. But the weird part about it is the airline industry actually was one of the first to recognize the ecosystem model and platform business models, circular business models, sustainable business models, co-opetition-based business models are something that you as a business architect can help the rest of the architecture team drive towards. Now, just so you can understand where this comes from too, and how this plays in, I'm gonna show just real quickly one of the Iasa business model components. This is just a few of our ecosystem models that we use. And notice that this is business and customer views. This is a public Miro board, which I'll put up in the comments. But notice that we all are familiar with the business model canvas. But as we think about, and this is for a make-believe company, Tinkelman, that's a coffee company. Notice that those business views link into so much more: prioritization, objectives, road mapping, business cases, which link into stakeholders and stakeholder initiatives and how stakeholders think about change in their environment. So I'm going to be coming back to this, but this platform business model challenge is one of the areas that we want to think most about. The second is that the world is driven by customers that change daily, new tools, new ecosystems, new costs. Customers are now involved, and the world is now involved in a pseudo information environment where expertise comes from literally anywhere and everywhere, and we have no idea the level of trust that we can have in that expertise. Just the simple fact that the phrase fake news exists is challenging. But it comes from the fact that we are bombarded with pseudo information every day. If you were to believe most of the outlet chain commercials for hamburgers, if you were to believe the information you get from that commercial, then you would be, a muscular 12% body fat, person with wearing a $2,000 suit, all because you ate their hamburgers. Right? What's fundamental to us is that we have to change the way we understand transactional value with customers, the way that we understand change outcomes, and the way that we drive that through these more traditional tools where business architects like to play now. So what I'm trying to get you to do in this is to become a part of the engine of innovation in an ever-changing ecosystem. So that is part and parcel to the to that second rule of you're designing in an ecosystem. Now, my third rule is design may emerge, but architecture is proven. Meaning, we use architecture and understand not just the art, but the science, and we work together to do so. Now, this is a place where architects don't. This is a place where we need a lot of work, and we need you to be involved in that work, because architecture is proven means that we need to have the science behind its proof, and it needs to be readily available to the lowest level architect, starting straight out of university or in university or before university, and that we have to prove the math. What is the relationship between cloud transformation and digital native or cloud native kinds of activities and its impact on customer behavior? What happens in wearables, in IoT, in the metaverse, and how does that impact the actual thing? It's going to really bother me. For example, that if I have to, I like Reeboks, and if I have to buy a pair of Reeboks in 3 worlds, I'm going to be really bothered by that. It's great for Reebok, but it bothers me more, because once I buy that real world version, I think I should get the digital versions for free. But anyway, the point here is structure and science is how you create things. Structure creates and realizes form. And we're going to talk, we have another axiom for business architects that I want us to do it. But think back to that beautiful, maybe you thought it was beautiful, but what I thought of was a beautifully architected outcome, that museum. This is what it looked like underneath. And the structural reasoning, what we often call systems thinking, or sometimes design thinking, but the real term is structural reasoning or systems thinking, is what creates those outcomes. This is why architecture itself requires so much change, because without that structural reasoning, you can often end up with a functional environment, but not necessarily something you'd want to pay to take your family to see. So again, I've used this concept before because the whole notion about this is that that all of this results in decisions at runtime, at execution. We talk about strategy to execution. We use all these big rhetorical comments and blah, blah, blah. But it boils down to which freaking thing did we actually put out there? And who built it and who made the decision about that thing? And decision rights and decision records are the fundamental transactional elements of all good architectural practice. And we'll talk about why that's important, because the reason why architecture is a profession and not just some group of roles is because we're one of those groups that have to be able to hold competing mindsets directly in our heads without thinking, without too much challenge. There's an old joke that we tell, each other. I don't know if anybody else ever tells it, but the joke goes, if you put 3 architects in a room, you have 12 opinions. And the reason that is because we are decision engines, change management engines, constantly balancing and rebalancing the variables of the environment and the ecosystem that we're working with. And you don't get that overnight. That doesn't happen from just, accidentally. Now, there are some people out there that are naturals. That I have to admit, I've met a few of them, and they just think that way. But even they had to practice over and over and over again these multiple mindsets: business, technology, people, stakeholders, ecosystems, objectives, decision records, technology depth, technology breadth, business depth, business focus. And even though one architect can't know it all, as a group, we can. Just like in any practice, you have specialists. Notice that the practice mindset, when you say the word practice instead of the architect team or I'm the VP of architecture, which is very hierarchical and like they all belong to me. When you say the word practice, you think, no, there's IP lawyers, or there's neurologists, or there's financial special financial focus kinds of accountants, or that a practice has different pieces to it, but it's still a living practice. And basically, this allows us to work and build to the last responsible moment. And this is something that we talk about all the time, is that decisions in a complex ecosystem need to be held until you have as much information as possible, but no later. Now, that means you make some decisions early or earlier. Some decisions get made just in time. But again, the velocity and the decision rights come from years of practice and experience, because nothing is ever as it seems. Now, again, this is that making the connections between outcomes and design are absolutely necessary. And I want to dive into that to a degree, but I'll come back to that towards the end. Architecture then must reflect both strategy and complexity. And that means we have to work together, and not work together like, well, I work with Jane, we're colleagues, but Jane and I are on the same team doing the same thing, even though she works way over there with directly with those business units all day long, every day. And I work way over here with these techies. But if we're not on the same team, then these connections break. And that's the fundamental argument for this, is that architecture is the important stuff, whatever that is. And we all quote Martin on this. It was a great quote. Number 5, quality attributes are business concerns. Every single one of your organizations is evaluating the impact of security right now because of the Ukraine war, because of the hacking, the world of hacking. That's just security. Performance, reliability, resiliency, usability, flexibility are all business concerns. They impact everything. They are cross-cutting. If we handle them well and we're prepared for them, we survive. And that means we can't afford business architects that don't understand what security is. I'm not talking about that you went and implemented the authentication and authorization methods in, Microsoft Azure yesterday. I mean that world isn't scary and is in your past, that you have some technical skills and that you maintain a portion of those to understand how quality attributes impact your business objectives and that change environment, that you understand that patterns and structures that we put in place are about business outcomes. And I'll just bring this up, even though I didn't circle it, this retry pattern. Oh, I did. The retry pattern over here on the right. You can't see me do that. I should use my point, but a little mouse. The retry pattern. I just came from a bank that was losing loan applications, all because one programmer didn't implement a retry pattern. They were taking loan applications, the service wasn't available that accepted loan applications, and it would just drop them. Now, let's just talk about that for 2 seconds. It's a bank, it's loan applications. They weren't getting them. Is that a technical concern? No, that's about real business. That's about business outcomes. So the direct, small technical implementation can fundamentally enhance or diminish your architecture or your outcomes. So it's perfectly fine to say, oh, well, that's the programmer's job, and they should just all know that. And I'm going to work on my business capability model, and we're going to have our conversations. Except you're a part of an architecture practice, and we, as a team, can own this. So this is why I say you don't get certainty. Rule number 6, you get comfortable with uncertainty. And this is something that I think the world of architects could learn from business architects. It is one of my favorite. It is one of my greatest honors to get to honor. It is a great honor to get to work with people like Daryl Carr and Wendy Keene because they have to deal with uncertainty on a regular basis. Right? At the enterprise architecture level, the chief architect level, and the business architect level, no one knows the answer. Everybody's guessing. Now, we may guess better, some may guess better than others, but we're all working together towards the answer. Only engineering mindsets try to look for certainty. The decision at velocity with complexity is the heart of uncertainty, right? We get value, benefits, functionality, quality attributes, requirements, options, and and decisions, and these things spin up in 1,000 different ways every day at all different levels of scope. But these decisions create outcomes. Other business environment ecosystem areas constrain options, like regulatory requirements. Business architects and solution architects working together make design and decision velocity go faster, become more reliable, and most importantly, become more valuable. We see that these decisions link to each other. Business cases and investment roadmaps and complexity analysis ends up linking to decision records and context views and the way that decisions cascade. The number 7 rule, it's called a minimum valuable product. Can we please stop talking about something as minimally viable? I'm sorry, it's just the word minimum and viable really bother me because it sounds like I'm getting the cheapest thing for the least amount of money. When what I want is amazing outcomes for my customers. Do so at a reasonable cost. Yes, do so in a time frame that is as reasonable as possible. Make that time frame as short as possible and that cost as low as possible. But why is that our focus? Why is our focus always that? It's because we still think like IT operations. Even our business architects out there still think, oh, minimize cost. Got to minimize cost. And what I've been trying to talk about with business architects is you are our method for achieving valuable products. And it basically looks like this: goal, business case, requirement, decision, delivery, use, measurement. This is the virtuous cycle for architects. Now, if you happen to have business architects and solution architects working together, this would be a kind of handoff. But if you don't, all this stuff ends up being left to the solution architect or whoever's in doing the project, or no one does it and you end up with suboptimal results. This notion of handoff to handoff to handoff, that we are constantly cycling from goal to measurement, goal to measurement, goal to measurement, not business case to delivery. Because delivery, if anybody knows anything about break-even points and anything about the total the way investors think, you'll know that at delivery we've spent the most amount of money and gotten nothing in return other than this thing. We don't know if this thing works. The thing is there to change the outcomes. Number 8, healthy tension is a good thing. We're not supposed to agree on everything with each other or with our stakeholders. Healthy tension, though, doesn't mean that we're all off playing our own games going, oh, those IT architects, they're just ruining everything. They're all so technical, or the worst, or worse on the other side. And I speak at software architecture conferences and talk about similar things. So I like to piss people off equally. Healthy tension is a good thing. It means that business architects deliver value streams, solution architects deliver solutions within the value streams, specialists deliver as consultants and or service owners, and enterprise serve as chief of, with skin in the game. And I'd love it if architects started to have budgets, because somebody's got to pay for the stuff that other people just don't want to do, but needs to be done. But this tension, this healthy tension, creates a balanced outcome between business and technical, between stakeholder and customer, between constraint and requirement and functionality, and also it creates a much greater ability to deliver. Now that means that all architects have to have these core skills, and I'm just going to mention the human dynamics, business technology strategy, IT environment, design skills, and quality attributes are the 5 pillars of architecture. If you have these competencies, you are an architect. On top of that, we build business architects, solution architects, information architects, software architects. But notice that when you have these 5 pillars, all the architects speak the same language. Now, we don't have the same experiences. We don't have the same background. We aren't perfect duplicates of each other. As business architects, you're going to spend a lot less time writing code than you do. Well, and you may not have written code for a while, but it gets me really nervous when you're working with a solution architect and you don't know what code is, that you've never checked code into production. And I've asked Wendy this question. She is my number 1 go-to example of what a business architect should be. And Wendy has put code in production. Does that mean she does it today? No. Does she have to today? No, of course not. She's busy being the spearhead of the architecture practice. And this is what I love about it when great specialists work together. The rule number 9 is it's not just people skills. It's about active stakeholder management. It is about actively understanding your stakeholder community. It's not about emotional quotient. Yes, bedside manner is nice, but they're just stakeholders. They're not gods. They don't run us. We as architects need to have a plan for what we as owners believe the change needs to be for our organization to succeed. They are stakeholders with sometimes similar view, but many cases I find the more we take ownership, the more people go, wow, you guys are great. I'm happy to work. I don't want to work on a product or a project or a program or a business solution or an enterprise strategy without my architects there, because they really come in knowing how to own an outcome. They don't coddle me and treat me like I'm a baby who's stupid. They work with me like professionals. So again, I go back to surgeons. Surgeons are infamous for not having any bedside manner at all. I don't think that's true. I think that's probably a misnomer and whatnot. But the point is, if you're capable, they're just stakeholders, and you treat them as such. There are tools inside of the BIL-T for that as well. We call this a stakeholder empathy map. It's a way of understanding the drivers of your stakeholders and coming up with a plan to engage with them. It doesn't mean that we're not nice to people. I'm not talking about, again, growing a super arrogant attitude. Trust me, we as architects, me very much included, already have enough attitude to go around. What we need to talk about is the opportunity to think of stakeholders as participants in a change process, not as the client. Get an engagement model now. If you don't have one, if you don't know what that is, then you're just. I used to say, that old thing that a fool with a tool is just dangerous. I always, people like to say, you can give a carpenter, or you can give somebody a hammer, it doesn't make them a carpenter. I always say you can give somebody a nail gun and it just makes them dangerous. And that's exactly what we've been doing. Building complex things with unskilled people is stupid. And that's what we do today. We build complex things with randomly skilled people. The world needs to professionalize, and our world more than most. And I love this guy. Just it's what I feel like half of those models are. Engagement models are not that hard to understand. You can look at the BIL-T. It gives you, it is complex, but it gives you a complete guide to value streams. It has all the cool ideas from the BIL-T, from the BA-T. It has so many of the cool ideas from TOGAF. It has so many of the cool ideas from the software architecture activities out there, all built into how to run an architecture practice. You'll find value streams, competency models, decision management, technical debt, coverage, principles, strategy, agility, business models, business capabilities. It is customer based. It is digital business model based. It is digital employee based. And all of that has been worked out in a set of Miro canvases and a set of other tools to help you design engagement models for your organization, and to do so actively, to design an architecture practice. We've seen two types of engagement models in the world: internally focused, known as value stream, type-based roles, type-based meaning the specialization-based roles, not hierarchical roles; outcome-oriented, innovative instead of governance-focused, with only one exception, and that is where human life or high-risk environments do need to be more governance-focused than the other retail kind of types. Engagement models are things that you can design: governing, delivery, value. All of these things are the tools that Iasa works with large organizations to design practices, and we've been doing the same thing. So that's my presentation, and I made it under the hour. So I saw that Daryl came back on just to remind me, because he knows me very well.
Yes, I'm in control of this one, Paul. I just love just sitting back and listening to you talk. There is so much passion that comes from you in terms of the architecture discipline. I may not agree with everything you say, but I just love the passion that you have for the role. And I tell you, if there was ever anybody in the world that was destined to start up a podcast called The Argument, I feel it was you.
Well, you know what, Daryl, let's have you on. Let's have you on, because I love that you don't agree with everything I say. I love that. I used to say a big part of the BIL-T is getting really capable, intelligent people who disagree in a room and letting them debate, discuss, and argue until they come to a balanced reasoning thing. That's why I see that healthy tension is everything. And I love that we disagree. I think that disagreement leads to me learning, you learning, and the world learning. So thank you for that.
Look, when I work with organizations, I often talk about the idea of having robust conversations. And that is how you push things forward. That's how you change things.
It
by
is.
understanding where you don't agree and figuring out what the best compromise is.
It is.
Absolutely. Look, I wanted to say thank you for sharing all of that. There was a couple of things that I was going to add in, and we've sort of run out of time, but I just wanted to highlight that little bit about MVPs that you mentioned, and the fact that whenever I talk about MVPs in organizations, if I draw it up on the whiteboard, I oversize the V. And so that I want people to concentrate on the fact that it has to be a viable solution. It has to be compelling, if not complete. It has to create a sense of value. Otherwise, you're not really, all you're doing is sort of spending money on enjoyable exercises, not actually generating value for your business.
Well, Daryl, why don't you just join me in a set of blog on a set of blogs and we'll just type it over and over and over again. Minimum valuable product. It works.
Compelling but not complete.
Minimum valuable product. I mean, everything you just said was built right into that one word. It's like it's just exactly right. Yeah, I'm thanks for noticing that. It's a great point. I think all the the good architects in the world have stressed those pieces. So yeah.